Well, welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another exciting episode of the It's All Possible podcast. I'm very excited today to bring to you the main man from Asia, Mr. Anthony Coundouris from Run Frictionless. Anthony, how are you?
Very well, thank you, Rob. Thank you for inviting me today.
I'm excited to have you here. Now, where are you calling from today?
I'm in Sydney, the Northern Beaches.
Oh, very nice. Very nice. Excellent to have you here today. And Anthony and I could talk for hours, ladies and gentlemen, because we have a couple of shared passions in fast motorcycles and yachts. But that's not what we're here for today. Although if we do get bored on the subjects, we may go there, but highly unlikely because Anthony's got some exciting stuff that I've been really passionate about, which is about Run Frictionless and a model that he's developed. But let's talk about a few things. Firstly, this is the It's All Possible podcast, Anthony. What does the word possibility mean to you?
Well, after reading your book, it really, for me, the biggest takeaway about what's possible is not being blinkered by information that may go against your intuition. And so a lot of times things appear to be impossible by the research and what's recorded and written in by journalists, but actually it can be possible if you can see their business model, understand why that piece has been written and see past it.
Yeah, I love that too. And I think that's one of the things that you've done a number of startups and a lot of the area you work in is really about possibility, isn't it? That if we just limited ourselves to facts and data and opinions and what's happened in the past, well, we wouldn't get very far at all. We wouldn't have some of the great products and innovations, of this century and the last century. That's my feeling on it. And let's talk about Run Frictionless because I really want to focus on this. Peter Drucker, the great management guru, once said that one of the things that happens naturally in business is friction. Now, the other two he said were confusion and underperformance. They probably go together. What do you think he meant by that? That when he said that one of the natural things that just occurs in business naturally is friction. What do you think he meant by that?
Well, friction is any obstacle that slows the customer from reaching their goal and equally slows an organization from making a sale. So it's experienced by both the customer and the sales organization. And if you think about what's a frictionless buying experience, it's where it's kind of effortless, right? It feels natural. It's a wonderful experience where every detail's been considered, and it really doesn't require any thinking on the part of the customer. So I think what makes Drucker's quote so interesting is that I think what he's talking about is internal friction. And during a session I had with Tom Williams, I think you know Tom. You've
yes,
worked with him
yes,
in the past,
yeah, I know
right?
Tom very well. Great guy.
Yeah, he's the author of the Seller's Challenge. He talked at length, having read the book Run Frictionless, about internal friction, and he believes that unless you address the internal friction, you cannot address the friction felt by customers. So I think it's really a leadership issue, and that Tom and probably Drucker would probably agree that friction's a leadership problem.
Exactly. And I think that's, where Drucker went on to, Peter Drucker talked about that, saying really, these things happen naturally. Everything else it needs leadership to solve it. And, I was just in a session with the CEO yesterday, and he was exactly talking about that. We had some 4 people along, and he said, the biggest thing I want to get going is to remove the friction from inside the business, because if we can remove that, or until we remove that, we can't possibly look after our customers and remove the friction on the outside. And I thought that was a really nice segue, albeit he had no idea I was talking to you today, but that's exactly what he was feeling. In a very fast-growing organization that's expanding internationally, but that was what he was. You can see where he's from his position. He was sensing the friction internally. It was really making life difficult, for the customer, be they enterprise or anything else. Given your work in businesses, then why did you come up with the Run Frictionless model? What was your inspiration for building that out?
Necessity.
Necessity. Tell me more.
Well, Rob, I design and build sales systems for enterprise and startup companies across Asia Pacific. And, when I design a sales system, I'm only given a couple of months to show results. And if you don't show results, you get the boot. So I wrote the 4Qs framework because I needed a robust tool that addressed friction at an organizational level. See, by reducing friction, you lift the entire sales performance of the whole organization, as opposed to putting pressure on individual sales performance. Now, there's a there's a magnitude of frameworks out there, but unfortunately, none of them are predicated on the concept of reducing friction, and none of them are built with product fit in mind. So when I got going building the 4Qs, I was highly influenced by a fellow called Mark Adrieson. He's the co-founder of Netscape. And he's also apparently the person who coined the idea product market fit. Now, I don't know what it was like for you, but for a lot of us, fit was like a light globe moment. What made that metaphor so brilliant was that rather than thinking about businesses like a linear step 1, 2, 3, Mark is kind of saying, look, it's 1, 2, then go back to 1, then do a bit of 2. Oh, and by the way, you need to go back to 1 again. So while I like the metaphor of fit, I found product market was a little bit broad and I needed something more granular. So today we've identified at least 8 kinds of plays or fits that one can make using the 4Qs.
That's really interesting. I knew you were quite a fan of Mark Andreessen's work. One of the things I always enjoyed about his work was they said to me, what would you do differently? This is after he sold Netscape. And he said, well, what I do differently now is basically my HR person is the third recruit. And he said, we spent so much time and we created internal friction at Netscape by not getting a plan of what the right people for the right roles at the right time. And he said that took so much bandwidth out of me. And he said, so the third hire in any startup or any new business I do is an HR director, can head that up. Of course, someone said, well, Mark, given you're the first, who's the second? And he said, the second's the lawyer. So which is, when you think about it, and I know it's kind of funny, but in a way around friction, you think from what he's trying to do, which is innovate, create, develop, and get to market, 2 big things that can kind of pull him back off that, legal agreements, partnerships, that detail, and then also recruitment and management of people. And so I thought that was really intuitive the way he came up with, that's the 2 bits I'm going to get out of the way first, so I can essentially make it easier to buy and get on with what I do well. So of the 4 quadrants, tell me, what are the 4 quadrants? Let's just talk about what those 4 are.
Yes, certainly. So the 4Q is short for 4 quadrants, is a decision-making framework. And I realized early on in my career, Rob, that sales was not the responsibility of just the salespeople. It's an organizational goal. So what you quickly find with the 4Qs is that it pulls together the entire organization to get behind the salespeople, so that the salespeople become the tip of the iceberg. So if I was just to give you like a summary of each of the 4Qs, I'd say Quadrant 1, who we serve, focuses on the customer profile. Think about it on 3 levels: who you serve today, serve tomorrow, and who you never serve. Quadrant 2, what you serve, is what we're serving to Quadrant 1, and it's generally regarded as like a product or a service. Okay, I like to think of it on 3 levels. I like to think about the features, the limitations, and the workarounds. Quadrant 3 is who we are, and it's ubiquitous. It's rather strange because unlike, say, Quadrant 1 and 2, which you can get a fit between Quadrant 1 and 2, Quadrant 3 is about our beliefs, and it cuts across all of the quadrants. And the last one, my favorite, by the way, Quadrant 4, focus on the precise number of interactions required to create a customer. It's a little bit like if you could ask yourself as the CEO of your company, what does it feel like to become a customer of my organization? That's what Quadrant 4 is focusing on.
Yeah, one of the things I really like about this, and you've mentioned it a couple of times, you talked about sales across the organization. One of the things I really like about it is it does talk about sales across the organization, right? And what I mean by that is not just the sales department. It talks about the organization getting behind the sales department or who is in frontline sales. And to me, that's really where that this cannot exist without leadership. And and what it's about is in those meetings where a CEO says to the sales leader, we're behind on quarter 2's results. And the head of legal doesn't go, thank God I did law at school, right? The head of legal says, how can I make my contract simpler for you guys in the field? Wow. The head of marketing doesn't go, wow, I'm glad I'm a creative and I don't have to worry about his numbers. The head of marketing goes, where are we down? What do I need to do to open the pipe, right? And I think that's what I like about the 4 Qs is that allows us to sort of have this interrelational. They're kind of interdependent, but they're not. You don't have to go Q1, Q2, Q3, Q4, do you? You can actually look at it and go, actually, we're pretty good in, say, Q2, but we really need to focus over here. Or as you said, I think it's with the business owners and leaders, you get the most traction is Q4, which is the amount of interactions. Would that be correct, that the business owner and leader likes Q4 is kind of where they hone to?
Oh, this is an area of great debate, because some investors that I've talked to who invest in startups and run even like fast growing businesses in Asia Pacific will tell you that, in fact, despite what you think, Quadrant 4 is sometimes the last place they put their money. They literally will get the customer, win the business, and then start to design Quadrant 4 while the customer is coming into the organization. I think where the quadrant they get most excited about, in my personal opinion, would be Quadrant 3, which is who we are. It's all about their belief and how well or not so well that belief is shared with staff, customers, and shareholders.
Yeah, I think that's right. So Quadrant 3 is one that I think though also gets overlooked. I see that's the one that people make lots of assumptions about. So people certainly in more established businesses, probably more than startup. Anthony, I think the ones that I tend to go back. Quadrant 3 is my favorite. I pull people back to that and say, well, tell me about Quadrant 3. And it's just, there is assumptions that people know, and they're missing North Stars. They don't really know what the OKRs are. They've all got, it's very subjective. And I find that that's not, Q3 isn't really sorted and really tight in the business. And that definitely comes from leadership. I find it's very difficult to execute on Quadrant 1 and Quadrant 2. And therefore, often in Quadrant 4, we get a little wobbly. And I like your other point, you talked about who we serve. I think a lot of organizations end up serving people that we shouldn't be serving. You mentioned that as well. You talk about who we serve, who we could serve, but in the future, but who we don't serve. But there's also, we sometimes go and try and serve those people. Do you find that as well?
Yeah, in discovering who we serve, this is the customer who really needs us right now. We can identify the customers that we ought not to serve. And the customers we shouldn't serve tend to be liabilities. And it's strange because most people can't think of a customer as a liability, but they can be. They're the customers who are more likely to ask for a refund, a discount. They're more likely to give negative feedback, whether it be verbal or written. And the worst cases is that because we serve them, we are obliged to listen to them. So they give us really poor intelligence on Quadrant 2. They start taking our product in a completely wrong direction. And because we're serving them, we don't realize that we're listening to them, which means that we're being influenced by them.
Yeah, wow, it's just such a great. I mean, I love these 4 Qs, Anthony. I just think they're just
thank you.
They're just wonderful because they open up so many experiences for me. And what I really liked about these is also, and again, I come back to this collaboration because I just think it's so important when organizations work together. They're so powerful, but so many are set up, and sometimes not with sinister intent, set up in silos or set up to compete against each other. And I've worked for a number. I mean, HP was a great example of one that could work in silos, but also could work in collaboration. It was fairly agile in being able to do it. But the way I like this is it just touches on so many parts. And you and I were talking earlier a little bit about this, and we were talking about how I think more in recent times, areas like operations have got behind this and have probably for the first time seen sales as more science than art. Can you tell us about that, how operations can leverage the quadrants and maybe which quadrant they tend to latch onto?
Yeah, so it was rather a surprise to me that operations people were interested in it. And remember that the 4 Qs organizes staff, their processes into one or more quadrants, essentially, breaking down departmental barriers. And so it becomes a way of empowering everyone in the organization to make decisions together and predict how likely a decision will make the next sale frictionless. And I didn't really understand much about the operations side until this fellow called Tim Wagner. He's a digital transformation operational excellence consultant in Singapore. And he said, look, Anthony, the way he explained it to me is that by borrowing staff from across various departments and then organizing them and their processes into one or more of these quadrants, you're effectively creating a virtual team. So in theory, people from different departments can meet once a week, sift through intelligence gathered and innovate using the 4Q's decision-making framework. And what you have, in short, is staff can make better decisions because they understand the respective departments and they can anticipate the knock-on effect that these ideas will have on other quadrants.
The one that I saw recently, Anthony, you might enjoy this story, but was under Who We Serve. And it was brought to me by a leader in a logistics business. And we were talking about where remuneration goes wrong, right? And she raised to me, she said, actually, where remuneration goes wrong in this business is when the Who We Serve is conflicts between what the sales team are incentivized to serve and the operations team can serve. And she brought up a great example of, and it's so simple, Anthony, like many business problems are, where they're incentivized to do a certain amount of freight of a certain amount of dimensions, which actually conflicted with the pallet sizes that the operations team were explicitly told not to ship. Now,
yes,
you can see how that affects on what we serve, because now we've all of a sudden created enormous friction, not only internally to the business, but we've now told a customer that we can do this when we in fact cannot do this. And I mean, this isn't friction. This is like glue, right? This just sees the business. And it was fascinating. And I was talking to her about the 4 Qs. And it was really, what was useful about the 4 Qs was it was really obvious to see where we needed to put our focus. When you could have got into a political debate quite easily, and no one was really, the point I want to make here, no one was intending to do this. No one was trying to create friction. No one was bad. No one was sinister, but there was enormous friction. And it was really good to isolate in the 4 Qs to go, this is where the issues come up. How can we as a team solve it? Which they were able to do reasonably quickly. But the point was, had they looked at it earlier and sort of had this as a decision-making model, I think it would have been so much more beneficial.
Yeah, because I think it's a really great example where, like you said, no one is deliberately trying to introduce friction. We're working in different silos or different departments. But had we had illumination around Quadrant 1, when somebody turned around and said, I'm going to serve a new customer profile, there would have been other people within that virtual team who could sort of put their hand up and go, hang on, before we change the specification of Quadrant 1, I just want to illuminate some issues that's going to happen in, say, Quadrants 2 and 4.
Yes.
And then you might want to back out of that decision. I mean, I've used the 4 Qs to do similar kinds of scenario testing, if you like, where with one CEO, the marketing team decided they wanted to serve enterprise organizations. So they wanted to shift. There was that moment where they developed really strong enterprise grade product in Quadrant 2. So technically speaking, they're ready to serve enterprise customers and make that shift from small business customers. But after thinking through the number of interactions or the cost to serve the Quadrant 1 for fit, what it would take to serve enterprise customers, and then the kinds of effects it's going to have on their shared beliefs, like how it's going to change the organization and the tone of the company. Once we've realized all of that cost, it became a really simple decision to just no longer think about serving enterprise customers, continue serving small businesses, but find new small business segments in Quadrant 1 by applying thin slicing. And that's exactly what they did.
Yeah, that's interesting, isn't it? Because it just, this is what I like about how they come together. And I know it's so simple the way you've got it in your wonderful book as well. It's so, but God, I know it's complex. Like I know it's so much. You've done a wonderful job in taking such complexity, but actually making it what it truly is actually it's simple in terms of our decision making and the knock-on effects to the different parts. And I see this also. I don't know whether you've come across this a lot, but organizations, when they go into working, especially if they work through channels and resellers, so they're doing third-party distribution, I mean, that really is interesting when it gets into who we serve versus can they serve it? So we might serve this amount, but we don't serve that, but can someone else serve it? So even in your case, the enterprise example, it might well have been they've got enterprise grade, but we're not an enterprise business. Like the who we are is not an enterprise. We're an SMB focused organization. That's our culture, our fit, our people. Is there another way of serving through third parties and distributors? Have you is it being used to kind of think about that model?
Yeah, so in Quadrant 1, it has the flexibility to consider who you serve to or who you serve through.
Yes.
And serving through is definitely what you're describing there, which is the partner channel. What was really interesting in that particular decision, one of the reasons they backed out of it was because they just spent 3 or 4 years with the operations team really developing a fantastic inside sales team that can just nail small business decision makers within minutes. I mean, they would just turn an account around within 7 days, from start to finish. And what was going to happen is that they're going to have to introduce new tracks and whole new kinds of outside selling experiences where now the salespeople are going to be required not to just be effective on, selling on the telephone, but it's going to be about the personal branding of the person. It's going to be about how they brand effectively when they go to someone else's organization. And so it changed the dynamic so much in Quadrant 4, made it really highly immeasurable that they were not interested in it. I think you're right. I think one of the things that they could consider doing is rather than serving to enterprise, they could serve through a third-party organization which already has built the trust, and where more importantly, where they have alignment of shared beliefs. So one of the biggest downfalls of grading and procuring partners that I've seen is where an organization will simply look at their revenue or the size of the customer base and completely turn a blind eye to a Quadrant 1-3 fit when they're thinking about partners. And so what you end up with, right, Rob, is you end up with a whole bunch of their end customers who don't share your beliefs. And then because they don't share your beliefs, that partner is never successful. They never end up selling your product.
And I think that comes down to, again, in Quadrant 1, when you talk about who we don't service, well, it's also who we don't sell through, and because there are some partners that don't have the alignment, and that cascades, because if you start partnering with them, well, then they work with end user clients, which you would never go to in a blue fit. Well, now you've got double trouble to try, and you've almost doubled your friction. Because and of course, if you've signed something like a 3 to 5 year agreement, which is pretty typical, that can be horribly expensive and really unwind great work that's been done if you've got a focus, if you're focused like the SMB side, like that organization was. So really, that partner selection and having a partner ecosystem and one that's reviewed. I think that's what I like about the 4 Qs. It allows you to actually review this, because sometimes a partner it might be fine for the first 2 years, but the market might change, it might grow, they might change, they might move. It allows you to go back and say, is this truly who we want to sell through? And then are they still serving the same market that we intended to? And we rather than I see a lot of these relationships just continue on because we've always done it that way, which I think creates friction. In the end of the day, it creates enormous amounts of friction, and things just end up going on. Sometimes I look at some decision-making processes, and something like Agile is an example in the Agile framework. Does Agile framework complement the 4 Qs?
Yeah. What's interesting about the Agile framework was when I presented the 4 Qs to this fellow called Walter Del Barco, it was around mid-2020. Walter is I describe him as an Agile methodologist expert. He's got 10 plus years experience in rolling it out in small and large organizations. He really understands the ins and outs. And we did a collaboration. He decided he wanted to do a mashup of the Agile methodology and the 4 Qs framework. And so what transpired was these 4 best practices that demonstrate how the 4 Qs drives Agile adoption into an organization. Perhaps I can share one of them here with you,
Sure.
one of the ones that was most interesting. Yeah.
That'd be great.
Yeah, so one of the things that was really exciting, and like I still remember the conversations we had around this. I was like, what? So yeah, what he described is that his first practice is to make the product owner responsible for matching the customer's problem with the product and not the salespeople. So we had identified many times where we get salespeople who are the quadrant leader of or quadrant one, they're the quadrant one leader. Then you have a product owner who's a quadrant two leader, but unfortunately the intelligence coming into the organization from the customer comes exclusively from quadrant one, which is the salespeople. And that's secondhand intelligence. And when you think about quadrant one and two, the byproduct of a quadrant 1-2 fit is revenue. If you don't have revenue, you don't have a business. So what he says, according to agile methodology, and this is where my jaw dropped when I heard him explain this to me, was that the product owner will be the custodian of both quadrant 1 and 2, not the salespeople being the quadrant leader of quadrant 1. And they will be responsible for revenue and achieving a quadrant 1-2 fit. And he could see that by adopting that change in an organization, that would drive agile further into the organization.
Yeah, that's really interesting. It's a couple of things that kind of made me think when you were telling that story, and I think this connects. When I was involved with HP, I ran a number of product divisions in Australia. PCs, emerging products, things like that. There's 3 different roles I had. That's not the point. The point was, though, that as the product marketing, we were called market development people, but we were the product marketing people. But the salespeople essentially reported to us. So they went through their sales leaders and all the hierarchy that was there. But in terms of big deal sign off, in terms of revenue, we were actually all had skin in the game. So the marketers, the product marketers in my role, and I was a sales guy in a marketing role, if you can imagine that. So it was very familiar territory to me. I loved the role. A lot of my colleagues did not like it at all, did not like having skin in the game and did not like, but we had skin in the game. We had a percentage of upside. And so we shared the target with the sales team, and we literally got involved in all the big deals. And it was a drove collaboration. It's the best I've ever seen, Anthony. I very rarely see it in organizations, but that's kind of similar. And if I can say that there's 100% one of the best things I've ever seen done. Not only did we do that, we also had a profit share as well across the business, which got everyone involved. But in particular, the product marketers owned in HP quadrant 1 and quadrant 2.
Yeah, because one of the worst things that I think is when product is being built in a vacuum, and the product people love it when they can just sit in the laboratory all day building product, but they don't want to answer the telephone. They don't want to have any experiences. They don't want to collect direct intelligence from a customer from quadrant 1. And this is an absolute disaster, because not only do you never get a quadrant 1-2 fit, but all the intelligence you're getting is secondhand from somebody else, which can be colored and changed.
Yeah, I'll give you a couple of examples from Apple, my Apple days in this. I'll give you an interesting one. I'll give you a really great example from Bill Campbell. But I remember when I visited the Apple labs, I took some clients across from Australia when we went through the Apple labs in Cupertino. It was very exciting. They're really at the forefront of stuff. It was a great toy factory, essentially, the Apple labs. And I remember seeing one product, and it was a peripheral type device. I think it was a scanner printer thing they were playing with, right? This is back late 90s. So about mid 90s, I should say. And I remember saying to the product guy, the dude in there, and he had really long hair, he's a surfy kind of Californian dude. He's going to draw, and he's going, "So Rob, what do you kind of think? You kind of like it?" And I'm like, "Yeah." I said, "It's pretty cool, man." But I said, why would people buy it? That's my question to him. And he's like, "Well, it'd just be kind of good if they did." That was his answer. Oh, seriously. And I've gone, I get it, but I kind of think I need a little more than that, right? And but that was it. They were in this vacuum, just designing shit basically that was really cool for them, but in this real true vacuum. Now that was one downside. Now the other really cool thing was there was a guy, I don't know if you heard the guy Bill Campbell. So Bill Campbell ran Claris and things. And what Bill Campbell did, which is really, he would love this model, but what he did was, if he found a salesperson, in Apple, go to the product team and go, hey, I've just been talking to a customer and what they need is a product that looks like this, 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 and this. Do you reckon you guys can develop it? And Bill Campbell would find out about this, grab hold of the salesperson by the scruff of the neck and say, I love the fact you've got this intelligence. I love the fact that you're passionate about solving this. But never, ever in this organization while I lead it, do you ever go to the product design team and tell them what to build. What I want you to do is take the passion and tell them the problem the customer is experiencing. Then I want you to introduce them to the customer, because they will come up with a much better concept of you and the customer will come up with. Tell them what the customer's experience, the friction the customer has. Don't solve it, just tell them, and then connect them, because they need to get out in the world, as you just said, and that's how we'll do it. And I thought, what a wonderful, beautiful, a really wonderful way of not shutting down the salesperson who was just trying to do the right thing, but also getting collaboration working, keeping Intel going, and getting the product team out meeting customers and designing something that really would have a fit. I thought it was a wonderful story.
Yeah, I think there are two roles, which only one of them we pay commissions on for salespeople, and that is, we all pay commissions for them to make a sale, but we don't pay them commissions to make the next sale easier. And if you really get your sales team right and you set them up and train them about how to just continuously collect intelligence from the forefront, from those contact points that are going on in Quadrant 4, and you keep them collecting intelligence and bringing it in, you can begin to build stories and you start to see patterns of that intelligence. And then the product people can then get onto that. Like you said, then they can then start to reach out. One of the interesting things that we found really successful was with the product people who don't want to find their own ways to reach out and touch customers, is we make them responsible for one specific interaction in Quadrant 4. So for example, a really good one would be, you're going to be the deep dive demo artist. Okay, so you take someone from Quadrant 2, and every time we need to do a very deep dive, it's going to be more technical based, you are going to be responsible for that interaction in Quadrant 4. And that's going to get you out of Quadrant 2 and prevent you from becoming a Quadrant 2 fanatic. Yeah,
that's a great, it's a great way, Anthony. I've seen it work so many times when it's intentional.
Yeah.
When we're really intentional. And I work with a great guy at Apple. He's a very senior leader now, a guy called Glenn Trestrell, and Glenn was just the best. But he knew where, and he was fantastic in Quadrant 1, but he had a very specific role in Quadrant 4. And it was, excuse me, he was absolutely brilliant at it, but there was that great role. And so he was very connected with customers. And so you also, as a salesperson, had incredible confidence that to actually connecting with customers. A lot of salespeople get nervous about, losing the sale, losing momentum and all the hard work they've done. And they kind of like want to maintain the IP and be like almost a broker for anybody else to speak to the customer, which I think is a big mistake. You can't scale, as they say in the classics, you can't scale with dependency, right? So having, he was just someone that I knew when he came in, and he knew that he came in at this point, like it was very intentional, and the spot was exactly out. And that was just something Apple did. I mean, I remember in the roles we did in Cupertino, the very senior, technical product development people, and these guys were rocket scientists, quite literally, had their roles in the sales process. But it was a sales process. It was a funnel. It was defined, and they would come in at this particular stage, and they would qualify the stage they came in because they knew what they were doing, but they also knew where they were going to take the customer at that particular point. And I think that's a really great one. And this is what I love about it. You don't have to go Q1, Q2, Q3, Q4. You can actually go Q1, but jump into Q4 as well if you're in that kind of role. How does it sit? We talked about the decision-making models, and one I said a little bit around the place is the McKinsey's 7-step, or what they call the 7 steps. Have you come across that, and how does it fit with that? Is it? I actually found it easier. If I'm going to jump right in, I'm going to say I found your model easier and probably a little more relevant for today's market. And I just wondered what your thoughts were.
Yeah, so the 7S, McKinsey 7 Steps, was written by two fellas in the 1980s, and like in late 2020, Alan Patissolano, who's he runs a practice called Digital Donkeys. He's a digital transformation consultant in Singapore. Kind of schooled me on this because he's a user of 7S, and then once he was introduced to the 4Qs, he actually substituted it out. The thing that's really cool about 7S is that it identifies, like the 4Qs, it does identify the concept of shared beliefs. The trouble with it is, though, which is probably what you're describing, is that it's bloody complex, and it's not so different to the complexity of the business model canvas, the BMC, where it's almost like, Rob, if we need to sort of sit down and just make a decision together, you literally have to have this thing in the back of your pocket, because you can't remember what the 7 steps are, and you can't remember the 10 parts of the BMC. So it's kind of like, it'd be like you and I sitting there. You want to make a decision about something, and I go, oh, look, let's just stop for a second. Oh, I just happen to have a copy on me right now of the 7S. Let me just pull it out. Okay, yeah. Okay, now we can make this decision now. Let's go ahead. The 4Qs only relies on 4 quadrants. And the thing that I found quite intuitive about it is you don't have to have the software or the framework in front of you. You can actually just in your own imagination make a decision using the framework. So you don't have to have any physical assets or anything like that in front of you. But I think the second issue with 7S, and this is something that, shall I say, is quite a contentious thought that I have, which I'll share with you, is that not everybody agrees that shared beliefs ought to be at the heart of every decision. And that's exactly what 7S does. It places the shared belief. It says, look, I'm going to introduce a sort of like a best practice. You're going to honor shared beliefs by considering that each time that you make a decision. And I can tell you now, I've sat in meetings with investors who are making an investment into a startup, and they are not interested in a quadrant 1-3 fit. They couldn't care less about your shared values, right? They're sitting there talking about a quadrant 1-2 fit. And if you're not talking about a quadrant 1-2 fit, i.e. revenue, you're not talking about a business, and you're not talking about return on investment. So you completely lost that person in that meeting because they're not interested in this shared beliefs crap. In fact, beliefs,
is there shared belief not revenue?
Well, that's part of the problem, unfortunately, is that when we bring shareholders into a company, quite often the founders are stuck with a certain group because they're the only ones who will invest in them. And one of the troubles that they run into is that they may not necessarily share the beliefs of that organization that they're investing in. The only thing they're interested in is revenue, which unfortunately the staff and the customers of that organization are not interested in revenue. So quadrant 3 in many respects is operationally really difficult to pull off because it's inside out. It's not just about what the founder believes, but about whether or not that belief is shared by staff, customers, and shareholders.
Yeah, it's very multi-layered, isn't it? But I completely agree with your premise, though, that it's virtually impossible to have the shared beliefs across everyone for every decision, because that's just not. I think shared alignment would be probably more sense than shared belief. Like we're aligned in terms of where we're going, as opposed to, are we aligned on? Are we sharing the same belief around purpose? Well, maybe not, because we've all got different purposes. And you see that in any complex, Anthony, don't you? I mean, there's a reason. There's a business reason why people are doing something, and they'll make a decision. the personal reason of why they're doing it can be completely different. If I'm a business owner and I'm selling the business, well, as the founder, I might be selling because I've got a health issue and I really want to solve that, and I need to get out of the business. Someone else who works with me is also aligned in terms of selling the business, but they want to do it because they want to do a management buyout and they want to own a part of it because they want to grow it. So we're aligned in the transaction, but our beliefs for doing it and our purpose for doing it are different, and that's okay.
Yeah,
there's nothing wrong with that. I agree with you on that shared beliefs. I like the bit about the how we serve too, because I think that's one thing at the moment, many organizations, well, almost everyone through the pandemic and COVID has now looked at how we serve and has been shocked in many ways about how we actually can serve and how we were forced to serve during COVID. And we're getting into that, how we do it. And I think this is the one thing I liked about where Run Frictionless sort of came from as well. I think it was around the scale. How do you scale? And I love your story about the business owner hiring a salesperson to kind of do what they do. And because I've just seen that so many times in small businesses, they hire a salesperson to do what the founder does, and it falls over in 3 months and they've lost $200,000 and the whole thing. And I think that's by taking that away and actually going, here's the system to scale. I know a lot of it has been based around startup and early stage, but I see 4Qs all the time in established businesses and in enterprise size organizations. Do you see that as well? Do you come across both startup and also more established businesses being able to use the 4Qs?
Yeah, I agree with you. Of the 150 organizations that 50 of them that we've served directly, and then 100 through partner channel, who are using the 4Qs today, about 150 organizations. The split is probably about companies upwards of 150 to 300, about 50% of companies using it sort of fit that realm. And then we've got, surprisingly, we have a bunch of pre-revenue companies that have been using it. But I think that I like to think about the magnitude of the organization, right? The more and more people that we add, the more and more chances that we have that there's the staff and their process become disconnected from customers. But if we make a conscious effort to try and align some of the people within the organization to one or more of these quadrants, we really get people to understand how their processes touch a customer. And if you're touching a customer and you understand that, then now you're really generating value for the organization. I think one other aspect that's been quite interesting is when the operations people have played with the 4Qs inside their organization, large companies, is it illuminates value that they haven't been creating, which comes back to your point. For example, what they might realize is that they're heavily dependent on quadrants 1 and 2, and they're not making any investments into quadrants 3 and 4. And perhaps their competitors are. It's rather like a 4-cylinder motor that's only firing on 2 rather than 4 cylinders. You're just not really generating enough value. You're at a disadvantage to your competitor. And so what can happen is that they go, oh my goodness, there's all this value that we could have been driving in quadrants 3 and 4. Why don't we, in the next 6 months, start investing in people and processes within those 2 and start to tap into those irrational buying forces that up until perhaps today, we haven't been doing.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. And I think, it's a bit like that, isn't it? With your idea on a sort of four cylinder, but it's only going on 2, but it actually looks like a 4-cylinder.
Right.
You look at it and go, well, it's got 4 exhausts. It's got surely it's on all 4 cylinders until it starts up, right? Until it actually starts to try and make a transaction, and then it's not so fast off the start line and just won't sort of do the right things where it should. But in the corners it's not so bad because it doesn't need all the 4; it just needs the 2. So it has these glimmers of hope that it's actually all right. But when in fact, under better inspection, in a full lap time, we would see that it's actually not. It's a quite little analogy. We could probably play with that in another podcast sometime, Anthony. But I think that's a really interesting one. But I do think over time, one of the things I like about this as well, you talk a lot about intelligence and leveraging the organization to bring intelligence, to the front, and using the 4Qs to bring intelligence, and rather than having it just sit in one spot, which is oftentimes just the salespeople, and it doesn't really go from there. Can you talk a little bit more about why shared intelligence or intel is it's such a competitive advantage?
Yeah, well, I think there's two places where organizations kind of fall down with intelligence. They either fail to gather it, or they gather it and then fail to act on it. And let's look at the second scenario. They gather it and then they fail to act on it. So the salespeople get really disappointed because they'll spend 3 months really trying to build out really good intelligence, maybe putting that intelligence through an app. And by the way, when I talk about intelligence, Rob, I think there's kind of two really good pieces. One piece is about the account that you might be working on. That's typically the intelligence that ends up in CRM. That's about intelligence on the specific customer we're serving today. And it's about the nuances and how we're going to win the deal. But there's a second kind of level of intel that I think we're interested in, and that is outside of CRM, how do we make the next sale easier? What is the new types of intelligence that we're seeing that's illuminating something in either quadrants 1, 2, or maybe 4 that we just have not anticipated? And so one of the things I like to do with salespeople is I want to put an application into their hand where they can directly send intelligence into the heart of the organization. You can use Trello, you could use Google Keep, it really doesn't matter what application you're using. And I want them to, the kind of behavior or the routine that I like to see is from every interaction you have with a customer, I just want you to give us one piece of intelligence to make the next sale easier. Okay, just one thing. Don't give us dozens of stuff, just focus on one thing that came out, put that into the application. And what's going to happen is, if we followed what Tim Wergner was saying earlier about the virtual innovations team, that team's going to get together every week, sift through that intelligence, start to take the intelligence and then put it together, build stories, and then from stories we can now infer things through the lens of the 4Qs. So we're not just taking intelligence and just kind of ramming it into the organization, saying to ourselves, oh, if that organization is doing this, we need to do that. No. The 4Qs becomes a means of synthesizing the intelligence and doing this religiously on a weekly basis to then figure out, if we only had $5 to spend this month, where do we want to put our chips? And if you can see what kind of intelligence you're getting coming into the company, maybe you can see opportunities that the competitors have missed.
I think that if you could do that, if you could have every salesperson contribute, as you said, just one thing on how we could improve for the next opportunity, the amount of friction you'd take out of the business would be phenomenal. Just to say, we bring in the case study 3 steps earlier. We should have connected them to the reference site video here. And we gathered that up. And certainly where you get the real scale is if you're able to do it on a team, we've got a team of, good salespeople, the intel you'd have and the efficiency you'd drive in a month would be unbelievable. And they would feel heard, and we responded, and we'd be so connected, wouldn't it? It's such a simple thing to actually have just that bit of intelligence, but it goes somewhere. It's not 10,000 things. It's not, as I said, it's like just one thing. How would we improve it next time for the next sale? So we've got this one. What's the next one? And I like that it's outside of CRM. I like that because it is outside of CRM. It's not in that. You might glean something from it, but it's actually outside of that. But as I said, there's plenty of apps to go and do it. It's more about the intentionality of it. And I see that's a really strong role for sales leaders. In all honesty, the sales leaders I'm working with, that's a real winner, that one. That's something you could literally coach to on that for someone who's not doing it. So if they're not doing it, why aren't they doing it? And they're not having the right conversations with the right people, and that could identify issues in their questioning technique and a bunch of stuff. I think that's a really great one.
Yeah, you can do some really interesting calculations to see how many iterations that you can make in a year based on the intelligence that you gather. And I think one of the issues that sales leaders or even business leaders and business owners face is that when they step out of the sales role, one of the critical things that quite often stops happening is the feedback loop breaks down.
Yeah.
And one of the common complaints I've heard them make to me on a number of occasions is they'll complain that the company doesn't iterate at the rate that it used to. That means the kind of speed at which they would iterate before doesn't happen. And yet, if there's now 10 people working on different parts of the 4Qs, surely that's 10 different minds and surely 10 minds working together could outperform one person, no matter how good the founder could be. I mean, could they be 3 times? Maybe they're 4 times better than a person, but they can't be 10 times better. So I think the issue is that they don't have a rigorous way of collecting that intelligence and then acting and synthesizing upon it using the 4Qs. Because if they do that, I see the opportunity is that they're going to outstrip and outperform the business leaders. And that's great news for business leaders, because now they can get on with their executive role and start leaving the projects and the reduction of friction to the people at the grassroots level.
Yeah, and the organization is aligned in doing that, and their people are seeing their leaders doing that, which is a great thing. You're seeing your leaders being effective by focusing on that, which in turn helps customers and helps you as a salesperson or a frontline person with customers. I 100% agree. As I said, I'm a huge fan of the 4 Qs out here. The more and more I read into it, the more and more I get into it, the more excited I get about this and see, because you get to see so many places where I could have used it in the past, or I can use it now. Just when you get into the kind of, it's almost a language in a way. I find it a simple language and simple set of concepts that I'm hearing customers, and they talk to me. I'm literally putting these things into different Q or 4 Qs. I don't know if you do that, but I'm now going, oh, that's a Q3, that's a Q2 conversation. But actually, what it does, it really helps me help them. But I'm able to digest it and dissect it and go, okay, this is what you need here. This is some extra set of questions. So I find it from just a diagnosis point of view easy, not in my own business, but also in my customers' business. So congratulations, man. I really, really love it. I think it's a really great piece of work that just needs so much more exposure. And that's why I wanted to chat with you today. I just love it. Hey, look, we're really just about out of time. I wanted to ask you kind of an off the wall, a little bit of a different question for you. Because I know you've traveled the world, you've lived in different countries, you've built and sold businesses, you've served organizations all around the place, and you do some crazy stuff on motorcycles and yachts, and you're a person who lives on the other side of yes, I can tell that. If you and I could get in the TARDIS, the time machine, and go back to 15-year-old Anthony, what advice would you have for him?
Strike a quadrant 1-3 feet earlier.
Yeah.
Yeah. Really, honestly, I think even in your personal life, if you think about beliefs, you have people who are going to share them and people who don't, and you really would just want to be on track with attracting people around you, like a sphere or a community of people who share your beliefs, and getting to that quicker and earlier in life, whether it be a business or in your personal life, is going to help you, because they're going to become your staff, your customers, your shareholders. They might even become the partner who marries you.
That's a great little analogy. Can I give you a quick little story on that one? Why it's so true?
Thank you.
Is that I don't know if you know the band Metallica.
Oh yeah, love them.
So Lars, the drummer, when he was in high school, he was just loved drums, loved metal, long hair, totally authentic, right? And so he's just reading. So he places an ad in a local newspaper. It's because what we had before the internet, and just says, "Hey, I'm a drummer. I love metal. I love these bands. Anyone need a drummer? This is who I am." He gets one phone call. Some guy rings him, says, "Yeah, hey, you sound like me, and I need a drummer." And that was James, the lead singer.
James Hetfield.
And from there became Metallica. And it was just a really interesting story about, just say who you are, what your beliefs are. Even at that time, our beliefs change over time, but who you are, what you do, and you attract it. You had one phone call. It just happened to be James Hetfield, who's the lead singer. And they said, let's put this thing together. And that was the formation of Metallica. So you're 100% right. Thanks for being on the show. I really appreciate it, Anthony. How can we find out more about you? Where can people go?
You can jump on LinkedIn and just key search my name, Anthony Coundouris, or if you just head over to Google and http runfrictionless.com, you can find me there as well.
Beautiful. We'll have all those details in the show notes. Everybody, fantastic talking to you, and we'll catch up again. Thanks, Anthony.
Rob, thank you. Thanks once again.
Thanks for listening, and we hope you enjoyed this episode of the It's All Possible podcast. Please subscribe and rate the podcast you listen to so we can continue to serve you and inspire others. Remember, connect to us on all the social media channels. The It's All Possible podcast is hosted by me, Rob Hartnett, and produced by the phenomena that is Finn Hartnett. Connect with us via LinkedIn, Instagram, or the link tree in the show notes.
This podcast is a part of the C-Suite Radio Network. For more top business podcasts, visit c-suiteradio.com.